Hey there folks, Caleb Downing with SDI, and today we're going to talk about some different projectiles and their different purposes. Let's get into it. Alright, so we're talking about projectiles. If I say cartridges, I'll try to make sure I don't say that because the cartridge is the whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle. We're talking about these things on the ends, these projectiles, the thing that actually flies through the air. And depending on how they're formed and made, they do different jobs. Alright, and so what we have here is just a small tasting of different kinds of projectiles. There are a lot. And I don't even have all the different kinds of projectiles, so I can't go over everything. But this is just a this is just a small tasting of what some of these projectiles can do and what they're for, all right? So over here, we have expanding projectiles, and over here we have non-expanding projectiles. We'll save these for a minute because they're relatively simple. The fun stuff is over here, all right? We have a hollow point. This is a Federal HST 9mm, knocked everything over, but 9mm, and if you can tell, this has these lines and perforations, right, on the projectile itself. And what this is made to do is, just like you have perforations on a piece of paper, it makes it easier to tear. When this particular projectile enters a soft target, whether it be for hunting or whatever else it might be for, and when it enters that soft target, that material enters into that cup, into that hollow point, and along those perforations, it's going to split and open up, and it looks like a beautiful flower. It really does. It opens up and it flowers, or it blooms, or it mushrooms is a very common term, and basically that projectile no longer is that round, it opens up, all right? And so in essence, what that's able to do, or what it enables the projectile to do, is to dump its energy that it's holding. It dumps that energy into whatever you fire this thing at, whatever it hits, all right? That's different than your full metal jacket projectiles we'll talk about in a minute. But that's a standard hollow point. You also have some different kind of cartridges, projectiles, that these are not quite hollow points. They're very close to a hollow point, except you can see they have these little tips on the end, right? This is a ballistic tip. This guy here is a kind of a flat ballistic tip, because this is a 45-70. These are made to be loaded linear, right, into a magazine tube. And if you have a sharp, pointy point at the end on the cartridge behind this cartridge, well, you could have an issue, because that pokey projectile could potentially pop off that primer, and you don't want to have that happen. So basically, these are going to act the same as far as what these projectiles do, and they're going to work very, very similarly to a standard hollow point. The main difference really being is that these have a ballistic tip. These have something inserted into that hollow cavity, and that kind of aids in expanding them as well, right? Very close, but just slightly different, all right? And there's some other nuances to it, but we're just going to be pretty simple. Another projectile that is somewhat similar, but it does break away a little bit. This is a soft point. This is basically a lead core surrounded by a copper jacket. And this guy, he does mushroom when he hits something, right? When he enters an object, he mushrooms. And instead of like the hollow point, when the hollow point comes in and hits something, it basically opens up. The soft point does more of a hitting and smashing and rounding out. It still will open up and mushroom, but it mushrooms in a different way, all right? There's different uses and purposes for these. I've shot plenty of small game and critters with each one of these kinds of cartridges, and they all work pretty stinking similar, all right? So moving on to our full metal jacket, or our non-expanding projectiles. This is like a round nose flat point. As you can see, it does have a flat point on top. It's not completely rounded like a regular full metal jacket would be. And this can somewhat simulate the feeding of a hollow point. It has that same similar profile. And so for a lot of guys, if you're going to be running hollow points in your, whether it be a defensive gun or a hunting rifle, and you don't want to spend the extra money to actually shoot those defensive loads, you can go to something like this, where it is going to feed similarly, right? But it's going to be a lot cheaper to manufacture these kind of projectiles, and so it's going to be a lot cheaper to shoot these kind of projectiles. And in essence, what these guys do is they don't mushroom and open up like these different hollow points or ballistic tip or soft points. They don't do the same thing. They're mostly used for punching holes in things, particularly for competition. And there's a really interesting cartridge or projectile that I have, or that I don't have, but is really interesting. It's called a wad cutter. And it's basically, if you could imagine like a 55-gallon drum shrunk down to a projectile size like this, just a pellet basically. Those projectiles are specifically made for target shooting to where they will punch a beautiful hole in the target, because that's what they're made to do. They're not made for hunting. They're not made for self-defense. They're not made for any of that stuff. They're made to punch a nice, clean hole, and it makes it easier to score targets and whatnot. So that's where you can see there's some differences in the application of the different projectiles, even though this is a 9mm and it's a non-expanding, and then this is a 9mm and it's expanding. This is what you would want to use for some kind of a defensive cartridge or a hunting cartridge, not so much this little guy right here. All right, same thing kind of goes to this. This is a 308. It's a full metal jacket. Again, this is going to punch beautiful holes in things, but not really going to be the best, especially for like hunting, because more than likely that projectile is going to pass right through whatever you're shooting at. Now, the only really discrepancy that I would say there is we live up here in Alaska, and there are many times whenever I will load up my defensive firearms with some kind of a hard cast or a solid projectile, because we got big critters like bears and moose, and if you have a soft point, you are likely, depending on the caliber and how much oomph it has behind it, you're likely to have that projectile mushroom, do its job, open up, but not get down into the inside of that potentially dangerous critter that's attacking you. That's why you would be shooting it. So there's times whenever you can use solid projectiles, non-expanding projectiles, to penetrate even deeper when that's necessary. But that's a very specific purpose, and again, knowing what the projectiles are capable of and what they're supposed to be used for, that's going to help you decide what exactly you're going to be needing. So hopefully I did not muddy the waters. Hopefully that was able to give you just a little snapshot of what some of these different projectiles are made for, what they can do. And like I said, this is a tasting. This is just the tidbits, right? There is a lot more different kinds of projectiles, very many nuances, different sizes, and the weights that makes a big difference. But for now, this is what we're going to stick with. So you have expanding and non-expanding. Hopefully that helps you. Research this stuff before you just go buy ammo and stick it in your gun and use it for whatever it is. There's different uses for different projectiles. All right, I'm Caleb Downing with SDI. Hopefully you found it interesting. Hopefully you found it helpful. We'll catch you in the next video. See ya.